Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another fun-filled YouTube experience. So thanks again. Got some new subscribers, and again, I always want to start off these shows usually with a big shout out to people coming coming aboard this wacky thing that's called Film Fanatic and supporting something that I really love doing, and I do it every day or try to do it every day. Even through thick and thin with things that come up. Last last week was pretty funny. We had a storm, or I should say this week on I think it was on Friday. Actually, no, today is Friday. The other day we had a pretty big snowstorm, and we lost power here in the morning, and I had another snow day from work, and I think, yeah, I had some gigs that were scheduled and they got moved to a different day. This was last weekend. The But I still did a video in the morning. My power came back on after it was only maybe half hour, 45 minutes. Then the power came back on, and I was able to still do a video, but then my the internet was wonky all day, and it was pretty much out that Saturday all day, and then it came back later in the late afternoon, and it was cutting in and out and wonky, so I couldn't upload any of the videos. So I ended up doing two videos on Saturday since I was stranded at home like everyone else during the blizzard. And then Sunday morning it was back, and it was clear and got dug out and all that fun stuff. So I uploaded both of those videos, and then I did another one that day. So I had like three videos. So those, with those exceptions, and then things like, if I have to do something early in the morning, I have some kind of thing scheduled, but I usually don't. But that being said, I try to do a video every day. I enjoy the whole thing immensely. So, and I think it's like anything else. The more you do it, the hopefully the better you get at it, and you just acquire a little bit of a better skill set. So yeah, and again, so I want to thank all the folks who have been subscribing to this channel. We're about at 310 subscribers, and especially more and more folks have been commenting on these videos. So super cool. I love having the dialogue back and forth with folks that I do know and folks I don't know. But I've met a few really cool people online that I've never met in person through this channel, and to me, that's the most fun aspect of it. That part of it, and then also my favorite segments that I do on this show are when I do the interview segments. When I have a guest on the show, and that's a lot of fun. I haven't done any shows with any guests in a while. It's probably been about a month or so. Haven't I haven't set up anything in the near future, but it's something that will eventually happen again. I love that experience, exchanging ideas, having guests, and I don't know. I try to bring a wide variety of people from different backgrounds onto the show. That's something I really really love, and some of those videos that I've done as far as the interview segments have been pretty huge, with views and likes. So that's a really that's the aspect or the part of this whole thing that I do that I enjoy the most. So at some point I will like line up some guests and get some more shows coming your way that will be set up in that format. So, but in the time being, lots of movies to talk about, lots of things around films to talk about, and things that are, really closely related. So, pretty exciting. So, yeah, I usually, you know, try to talk about other things that are, obviously very, very, very close and inspired and that are part of film. I always look at film, I don't know, I kind of look at things a lot of the times as in terms of like metaphor and symbolism, and it usually helps me try to kind of understand certain things, personal things that I'm trying to figure out, or concepts that I'm reading about. I generally I'm a big fan of mythology, but also like metaphor and symbolism and all those kinds of things. And I always think of music and film and the arts in general. Obviously, they're all interconnected, but particularly around film, I always think of film as being an incredibly broad thing. I think it's such a massive genre, and it can mean a billion different things. And I feel like I look at the world of film or the world of movies as like a giant tree, and all the things that I try to tie into it. Where sometimes I do these specialty shows where I'll focus on a particular director that I love, or I did a show where I talked about my favorite director, Stanley Kubrick, and of course that's like obviously that's like directly related to film. But I'll do these specialty shows of where I'll talk about where I kind of feel we are as a culture, and how social media and from just the general public, and then also tying that in with film critics, how that affects films that come out these days, like new releases. And usually with the social media thing, you know, again, there's a lot of good that comes out of that, and I feel like there's a lot of a lot of negative things that come out of that. I don't know. On one hand, I always feel like, if you're really passionate about something, and this can be in general, be a general thing, but if you're really passionate about something or pretty knowledgeable about something, it's pretty easy to start up like a podcast, or put up some kind of page online, or build a website, start up a YouTube channel where you talk about those things and you share that information. And to a degree, certain people who have a deep knowledge, they can share their knowledge, and then you can network. But you can do all of these things, and then with the whole YouTube explosion, you can set up a channel and where you just talk about your favorite films, or your favorite you know vinyl records that came out, that you own, for instance. And you can acquire a massive following, and it doesn't cost you very much. You can do it on, in real simple terms. Get a mic, get a pretty decent microphone, a computer, a laptop, or a camera, and there's thousands of folks out there that are able to make a living off of something that they love. And there's obviously, a billion people doing that all at the same time. And it's pretty cheap. It's ready. It's the technology is readily available. And there's obviously people, you have to sift through a lot of content and people who are content creators. And if you kind of get a gist and you get a consensus of what's going on, or if it's related to a particular subject, you can kind of make up your own mind individually, like the quality of what's going out and what the whole thing is about. And on the negative side of things is that because of all of technology that's readily available, everybody and their grandmother is all of a sudden, all of a sudden feels like they're a specialist in a particular area or field, in that they're like important and that they're like a legitimate critic. So it's a weird balance. So I did a show on how people use social media to basically talk about anything, and feel inclined that no matter what they're talking about, their opinions matter. And I've seen how, especially the last few years, how that affects new releases. If 1,000 folks out there really like a film, or they don't, the platform out there for people to express their opinions is at a unparalleled level. And I've really seen, for good or bad, again, it's subjective, but I've seen how that really affects new things that are coming out, particularly around films. And then you tie in also with people who are, critics for various publications, who like actually make a living as a critic. So I did a show where I just talked about that aspect of it. And then I've done shows of like what people find inspiring, in the artistic realm. I did a specialty show on that. I also did a show on my band Quantum, my electronic group that I have. And so, like I said in the beginning, I like to look at things sometimes through the use of like metaphor and symbolism and all those kinds of things, because it's easier to navigate sometimes, or to identify certain or particular things. And I look at, film as being this massive tree, and all of these other things that I just mentioned as being like little branches in that tree. And I look at, when I tie in things with music, to me it's all interconnected, even though it's outside of that particular um, focus, say, of the video. It's, for me, it's all together. It's all in the same. It's all in the same pool. So there's some things coming up for my band Quantum. Quantum is my electronic group that I've had for, quite some time now. I've had the band for about 7 or 8 years, and it's me. It's basically me and my good buddy Mike Whitehead, who plays bass in the band. We've had this crazy band for quite a few years, and we've been really fortunate to carve out a little life for ourselves with this odd little band that we have. And for me, it's my little outlet. It's music that, it's all original music. It's all like it's basically my baby. I've kind of created the whole thing, and we play all original electronica inspired music, and we try to pull in lots of different resources, or I should say lots of different inspirations, lots of music that I consider to be non-electronic or electronica, jazz and punk rock and movie soundtracks, all those kinds of things. So world music. But, you know, over the years we've put out about 4 or 5 albums. We had our debut that came out about probably like 6 or 7 years ago now, and then the second album that came out that was called Digital Palace, and then a few years after that. Usually there's about a year or 2 years between albums. About 3 or 4 years ago, we had our album The Stars Beneath Our Feet, which came out, and then there was about almost 4 years in between that album and our most recent album, In Dreams I Saw Chapter 1, which came out in June of last year. And then we also have another album ready, which is the Chapter 2 of that album. It's kind of a double album. Well, it is a double album. We were originally going to release everything together, but then we thought, well, that's a lot of music. Each album is about an hour. One album in particular, I believe the first album is a little bit more than an hour, and chapter two is about an hour. So we thought we could do that. That would be fun, and I'm still a big fan of concept albums and double albums, even though that's not a thing that happens pretty readily. It doesn't happen as much. It was a big thing in the 60s and 70s. Bands would do that, but so we decided to just release chapter one, which we did. But we recorded both albums at the same time. So at some point we'll release the second one, chapter two. It's all done. It was all, like I said, it was all recorded at the same time. We basically got everything ready, and it's just kind of sitting there waiting for us to put it out. So it would be cool to put. I'd love to put it out, really soon. But we're waiting for a special time or a special date or a gig or an event that we can plan and do, another like release show, because we did one for the last album, and it was really such a fun experience. So look, stay tuned for that at some point, and hopefully this year, spring, summer, maybe that will happen. We're still figuring those things out and seeing how things go. And as far as shows go, we have this coming Monday, Quantum will be playing at the Myrtle Street Tavern in Rockland, which will be our first time playing there, and I think the first time they've had anything, kind of resembling the music that we do. So it'll be an interesting experience. We'll see what happens. It's going to be our first show at the Myrtle. I really enjoy the Myrtle Street Tavern. It's a cool local dive bar, but it's definitely changed quite a bit. They've really, it's really set up in a much different kind of thing now. But they started this alternative kind of music series of where they're having different music and bands there that they don't traditionally have. They typically, on weekends, Fridays, Saturdays, they have a lot of like, classic rock bands and cover bands, and they've always had good bands there. But they have a certain kind of format, and this past year and this year they decided to still have that, but have these alternate nights, Mondays and then also Thursdays. They're trying to do music and have music there that they don't normally have there. So we'll be playing there this coming Monday at Myrtle Street Tavern in Rockland, Maine, from 8 to 10. It's a free show, so if you're around, come on by. It should be a fun time, and we'll see how things go. And then after that, we'll be doing the big shows that we have coming up. We got 2 dates coming up at the All Roads Festival in Belfast, Maine. We're going to be playing at the All Roads Festival in May. And then it's going to be a Friday and Saturday show. And then we just also booked another show at the Poor Farm in Union, which will be the weekend before. So stay tuned for that. So we got some things coming up. Pretty excited about those shows. So we're trying to, keep the train on the tracks, keep things going. I've been wanting to try to keep that band more visible in the live setting, because I felt like this past year, especially over the summer and going into the fall, I felt like we kind of found a little bit of a newer audience. I don't know, we kind of felt with the new album coming out, we kind of got some really good momentum going. So I kind of wanted to keep the thing, going to some capacity even through the winter. And we had a gig in the fall, and we just recently played a couple of shows. So it's been cool, like not having huge lags of time or where we're not playing. We've been playing some gigs, so it's been nice to try to keep up the momentum a little bit to a degree. And we have a lot of new material that we're working on, and we've been back to rehearsing, so it's all part of exercising that same muscle. So yeah, stay tuned for more events that will be coming up, down the pike at some point. So So today's show is a movie I've been really wanting to talk about. It's a really, for me, it's a real new discovery. I bought this last year. I bought this movie probably about 6 or 7 months ago, and it's a movie that I had heard quite a bit about, particularly like early last year. And it's just an incredible movie. This movie is called Road Games. It came out in 1981. It's an Australian suspense film. It's the best way to put it. And it came out in 1981, but I also feel that this movie definitely fits in because it's really low budget and it's really it's highly suspenseful, and it's 1981. It's an Australian movie, and it's got this really raw quality to it. I kind of consider it to be part of the exploitation world. This film was directed by Rich Franklin, and the cast is amazing. Jamie Lee Curtis. This was maybe her second or third film, right after John Carpenter's Halloween, which was her debut. John Carpenter's Halloween came out in 1978, and this came out in 81, so just a few years after. And again, the cast is just so awesome. Stacy Keach is also in this film, who is such a great, fabulous actor. I've always been a huge fan of Stacy Keach. He's played tons of dramatic roles through his long career. Mike Hammer was a show that he had on television. That was probably as a kid. It was like basically it was a TV show. It was like a detective show, and it was on. I think it was on CBS from 1984 then to 1987. And Stacy Keach was the actor of that, and that was like a crime or a detective. Basically, it was like a cop show, and it was always great. And that was the first time I remember as a kid seeing Stacy Keach. He was in another show after that, which is later, much later, that came out in 2007, called American Greed, which I haven't seen. Road Games, 1981, which was one of his first films. He was also in another awesome movie, American History X. He plays the father in that movie, which is, I forgot about that. With Edward Norton. That is such a great movie. I forgot about that. He was in another film in 72 called Fat City. He was also in The Long Riders in 1980. The Minstrel's Daughter in 1984. And his career was pretty big. Stacy Keach's career kind of started in the early 70s. He was also, in some films that I definitely definitely I would consider to be part of the exploitation world. He was in this one movie which I haven't seen, The Mountain of the Cannibal God, in 1978. And that was directed by Sergio Martino, which I definitely have heard of this film. But I've always been, seeing Stacy Keach, like I said, with the television show that I remember growing up. My dad was a big fan of Stacy Keach. And, seeing that film, or seeing that TV show, Mike Hammer, I always loved that show. And so I was always a huge fan of his work. And I really think Stacy Keach was one of the greatest like character actors around. One of the best like working actors during that time. And Richard Franklin, who, like I said, is a really well known and hugely well respected Australian director. he was kind of looked at or regarded as kind of Australia's Alfred Hitchcock. A lot of his films are, very suspense driven, very much inspired by Hitchcock. He did a lot of low budget films. Um, he also directed, which I did a review on way back when. I did a few times on this channel. I've done some shows around franchises. The first one I did, the big one I did was where I did a show on all of the Friday the 13th movies, which I'm a huge fan. That's my favorite franchise. I did a show where I covered the movies, not the entire franchise, only a few of the movies, because a lot of the movies I'm not a huge fan of, but I did more or less a coverage of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies, and I also did um, a big show on the Halloween franchise. Kind of similar in vein to Texas. I didn't cover. Not a huge fan of all of the movies. I like there's certain films in that franchise that I really really love, but I think there's a lot of inconsistency at times. So I didn't do the entire movie set. Friday the 13th, I did pretty much every one because I just love those movies. And the other franchise coverage that I did was the Psycho franchise, which is a franchise. And I always forget that that's a franchise for some reason because, of course, the original by Hitchcock with Janet Leigh, that's, an iconic movie that's always talked about. But I always forget that there's actually 4 movies in that franchise. And I did I think I did a video or videos on about 4 of the movies. There's 4. No, I should say I did 3 movies in the franchise. There's a 4th one I have not seen. But Richard Franklin, who directed Road Games, directed Psycho 2, which was the sequel to the original by Hitchcock in 1983. And I had not seen that movie in years and years and years, and I watched it. I watched all of those films. Usually, when I do the coverage of a franchise, I usually really enjoy watching each movie in succession. And I did that with the Psycho films, and I had not seen Psycho 2 in years, and that came out in 1983, and that movie is super awesome. I forgot how tremendous it is, and that was directed by Richard Franklin. Such a great film. And that came out in 1983. Road Games came out in 81. He did a film called Patrick in 1978. Link, which was a later film, which I do remember seeing, that came out in 86. FX2, which came out in 91. I remember seeing that one. Cloak and Dagger, I remember seeing that one also. That's a pretty cool movie. 1984. Not Quite Hollywood, which came out 2008. But overall, Richard Franklin is, regarded as kind of Australians' version of Alfred Hitchcock. Most of his films, he's definitely done films that I consider to be an exploitation world. And again, like I do consider this to be, it's from pretty much my favorite decade. I, cover lots of new films, but I always go back to 70s and 80s. Those are my 2 favorite decades. Movies that just have a real grittiness to them, and they have they tend to have this real low budget kind of aesthetic, and they're just really raw. And this film has all those characteristics. Super awesome movie. I was really blown away by this movie. I had heard about this film, like I said before, a few years back. And I remember last year, I saw a couple of different interviews on YouTube with Quentin Tarantino. Huge Tarantino fan. He's such a walking encyclopedia of film, and he's always I've talked a lot about him in various videos over the past year, in the last few months. But he is a huge purveyor of always talking about the world of exploitation. I look at him as being, I mean, he's such a world renowned director at this point, and he's such a household name. But I really look to him as an example of the real definition of like a self-made artist. He came from this background where he just has so much passion for what he does. And he didn't, he had a real interesting trajectory, but such a unique path to becoming, the legendary filmmaker that he is. And he's one of my favorites. I love all of his films. And I think as he's gotten older, I feel like he's even gotten to be a better director. I think the last film that he did, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, is just such an extraordinary movie. That's one of my favorite films of his. It might be my favorite film as far as like some of the films he's done in the last 5 to 10 years. But just an extraordinary director. But he always references his background and the films that really deeply influenced him. And he always has references to those films in his own work. And that's really all pulled from the exploitation world. Movies that he grew up watching. And the way he got into film, particularly when he became a writer and a director, he went through a whole different way or came from it from a totally different background. A lot of filmmakers go to actual film school, or they get like formal training. They study with, and through that they might get various internship projects where they work with experienced directors, and then they eventually start their own full. They decide to venture out and get their own work financed. But most folks in the industry like go to get a formal education in some various a film school or things of that nature. But he literally learned by working in a video store for like 15 years or so, and he fell in love with film from being a fan, and just learned all the ins and outs of what makes a film great. And he always references especially the world of exploitation in a lot of his work. I had a real fun, cool experience a few months back where I had a friend over, and we watched I think we watched like 3 movies back to back, and we watched like 2 movies that I had just bought. We watched a couple of. One was like a horror exploitation movie, and the other one was like a kind of a sleazy exploitation, sexy kind of movie. And then after we watched those films, we watched Jackie Brown from Tarantino, which I love that movie to death. And it was so cool watching 2 pure old school, kind of grindhouse movies, and then watching Jackie Brown and seeing all of those references to that genre in that film. It was really cool. It was a really cool kind of learning experience, and it was really enjoyable. It was a lot of fun, and I got, even though I've always seen that in his films and especially Jackie Brown, but it was even more obvious to me, his references and where his influences were coming from. But again, like I said, I listened to podcasts and things where he's interviewed, and he was doing this one show, and he was talking a lot about this film, Road Games by Richard Franklin, and he was saying on how Richard Franklin was basically one of his, favorite directors. He was really into a lot of Australian directors. Probably the most famous Australian director is George Miller. Obviously, he created the Road Warrior franchise. Amazing, amazing director. One of my favorites of all time. I'll eventually do a show on George Miller and those movies because those are just amazing. But he was talking a lot about Richard Franklin, and I was like, oh yeah, for Richard Franklin, and but I had never heard of this movie. So, and I again, before I came across this interview, I had heard this movie mentioned in a few other shows. So it would pop up. But in this one particular show, he was talking about this movie, Road Games. He felt that this was like the most important movie that Richard Franklin directed, and it was actually his one of his favorite movies of all time. He thinks that this was like, I think he even said that, could be wrong, but I think he even said this was his favorite Australian movie. And so I think that week or a week after I listened to this interview, I was at Bull Moose and I saw that they had this there. And I was like, yes. So I super psyched and I bought it and was totally blown away by this. It's an incredible movie. It's so suspenseful. And again, it's got this real exploitation kind of vibe. It's from 81. It's really raw. It's really low budget. It's kind of sleazy, but it's so suspenseful. Definitely steeped in, in the world of Hitchcock. But just such an awesome movie. And I was blown away by it. And this movie has so many great, this package, this Blu-ray edition is just fabulous. It was put out by Scream Factory. There's like hours of special features on here. It's just awesome. Really cool interviews with Jamie Lee Curtis and also Stacy Keach. Just awesome. Such a killer movie. So ever since then, I've been wanting to do a show on this movie. I've only seen it once, and I'm looking forward to watching this again. But this movie is killer. It's a killer movie. So I highly recommend it. It's a movie I've heard a lot about, and then I finally bought it. Road Games, 19, 1981. Classic Australian cinema right here. So definitely check this out. If you get a chance, if you're into buying movies, I definitely recommend getting this bad boy. But otherwise, try to see this edition because the cinematography and everything is just fabulous. And the transfer of this film from the original negative to Blu-ray 4K is just incredible. Such an awesome movie. One of my favorites. So this is Jason Dean. I want to thank everyone for their support. And we will see you next time. Peace.